If everyone's ready to get going, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 14th in our series of CAQDAS webinars organized by the CAQDAS Networking Project, which is based in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey. Before we get started today, just to remind you that we have several more webinars scheduled before the summer, so please do keep an eye on those. It would be great to see you there. All of our webinars are recorded, and you're going to be sent a link to the recording of this one after today, and all of our recordings are available on the YouTube channel, the details of which are just here. If you're interested in contributing to our webinar series, I'd love to hear from you. We're always interested in having new contributors, so that's cool. We also have a range of online training that's coming up, and all of this is discounted at the moment still for researchers and students at this tricky time. So today, as I said, is our 14th webinar this academic year, and it's the second webinar delivered by the CAQDAS Networking Project team itself. Today, Christina Silver is going to be sharing with us some advice and ideas around choosing a CAQDAS package. Christina is the manager of the CAQDAS Networking Project, where she first started teaching in 1998 alongside Anne Lewins. And since then, she's worked both through the CAQDAS Networking Project and also as the co-founder and director of Qualitative Data Analysis Services to design effective and robust ways of analyzing qualitative and mixed data using dedicated software and in facilitating others to do the same. She's trained thousands of researchers all over the world and supported a range of public and private sector organizations more effectively manage data through powerful use of quantitative data analysis packages. Christine has written many publications about CAQDAS, including Using Software in Qualitative Research, a Step-by-Step Guide with Anne Lewins, and Qualitative Analysis using Atlas TI, Max QDA, and Vivo, the 5-level QDA method, developed and written with Nicholas Wolff. 5-level QDA is a method for harnessing the power within qualitative data analysis software packages, independent of methodology, software package, or mode of learning. Christina has also recently been made Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. When she's not working, Christina loves swimming and camping and frequently combines the two on holidays where she and her family adventure to new lakes and rivers across Europe in their camper van with their dog. So today, whilst Christina is speaking, please do feel free to post any questions that you have in the comments in the chat, or comments that you have in the chats function, and I'll collate them as we go along and I'll pose them to Christina when finished her talk. So if that's all right with you, Christina, it's over to you now.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. Excellent. So thank you again for that introduction, Sarah. It's nice to be here. I'm going to talk about some key considerations today in choosing a CAQDAS package that's appropriate for your particular needs. I'm going to do that by talking about 4 key things. First of all, a few thoughts about the role of CAQDAS packages in your workflow, a little bit about the breadth of options, which will become clear fairly soon. And then I'm going to focus on some key methodological and practical considerations in terms of making appropriate choices amongst those options that we have available to us these days. Okay, so first of all, computer-assisted qualitative data analysis, CAQDAS. That's an acronym that was coined by the originators of the CAQDAS Networking Project, Professors Nigel Fielding and Raymond Lee, after they convened the very first conference that brought together users and developers of these tools back in 1989. The term assisted is the most important word in the acronym. Programs vary very much in terms of the amount of analytic assistance they provide, which I'm going to talk about more later on. But it remains the case that even those programs that do perform some analysis for us require the researcher to interpret what the results mean. And that's a really key thing to keep in mind if you're new to these programs. It's also worth mentioning that CAQDAS as an acronym was intentionally meant to evoke the thorny issue about using computers to facilitate qualitative data analysis. And Nigel and Ray did that by having that close connection between the acronym CAQDAS and the word cactus, the thorny plant, the cactus plant. And as many of you will know, there remain quite a lot of debates about the role of these software programs in qualitative data analysis. There's also been some debate about the suitability of the term itself, and some prefer using other terms such as qualitative data analysis software or the broader digital tools for qualitative analysis. But which tools, which programs are we talking about? So here I have, I think there are 42 logos here of different applications, and I'm going to be touching on what these can do for us in terms of supporting the analysis of qualitative data. With so much choice, so many options available to us, it becomes important to think about categorizing these programs, okay? That's actually a process that began with Renata Tesch's work in 1990. She began the process of relating analysis types to the then available software programs, distinguishing according to whether the research interest is in the characteristics of language, the discovery of regularities in data, the comprehension of the meaning of text or action, or reflection. Weitzman and Miles later on built on Tesch's work by creating a taxonomy of qualitatively oriented software programs, and they distinguished between code-based theory building software and text retrievers and text-based managers. But of course, a lot has changed since the early to mid 1990s, both methodologically and technologically. And the CAQDAS Networking Project historically has focused on software that was specifically designed to facilitate qualitative approaches to qualitative data. And indeed, on our website, we define dedicated CAQDAS packages in that context. So they focus on qualitative data, but they may also allow the importation and working with mixed or quantitative data as well, but include tools such as content searching for words and phrases, coding, qualitative coding of texts and visual materials, linking, querying, writing, annotating, and mapping. So that's the kind of historical context of the use of the term CAQDAS. But today, what I want to do is to discuss programs that are designed to facilitate a range of approaches to the analysis and interpretation of all forms of qualitative data. So in doing that, I'm taking a broad understanding of the term CAQDAS. And to frame that, I think it's really useful to think about analytic methods on a spectrum, okay? And that spectrum can usefully be thought as from one side being qualitative approaches to qualitative data that really prize human interpretation and how we as researchers are involved in the process of meaning making. And on the other side of the spectrum, more quantitative approaches to analysing qualitative data that often may necessitate or incorporate assistance from the tools that we use. Now, on this spectrum here, I've placed a number of different analytic methods, but it's worth just being very clear that each of these can sit in various different places on that spectrum. And many of these terms, for example, thematic analysis, discourse analysis, what researchers actually do when they take those methods can be quite various. So this is not meant to be a kind of static representation. It's meant to rather get us to think about working with qualitative materials and the idea that we can work with those methodologically in a range of different ways, and that we may do that variously as we go through one particular project. Okay, so it's useful, I think, just to say a few words about why bother to use these tools at all. And there is continued debate. Right from the outset, there was debate about the role and the usefulness of using software to facilitate the analysis of qualitative data. And those debates continue even today. Many researchers prefer to work entirely manually, for example, with hard copy printouts of transcripts, maybe using highlighter pens, notebooks, etc. And in the literature, there are discussions about how the use of CAQDAS packages can facilitate various aspects of quality in our process. So transparency, validity, rigor. But for me, all of those have to do with access. What do I mean? So once we start using any program, we are afforded access in various ways. First of all, access to the materials that we're working with, the data themselves, but also other supplementary materials. And we can have access to those from the outset of our use of one of these programs. And we often at the CAQDAS Networking Project talk about CAQDAS packages as essentially project management tools. So they provide they can act as a container to give us access to all of the materials that contribute to a particular study, and a means of connecting, making linkages within those. Then also is the idea that using these programs gives us access to the ideas that form the basis of our analysis, whatever methodological approach we're adopting. And the key thing about using software is that we have access to those previous ideas we've had at a click of a button, okay? And for me, that's one of the key means by which using software can make what is often described as the kind of messy process of qualitative data analysis more manageable. Then we also have access to our process. So some programs provide semi or fully automatic technical audit trails, in that they remember every software operation that we've undertaken, so that we can have a very clear and concrete trail of our process. But we're also often able to reflect on our process through the use of the software. And accessing process is a really key aid to transparency. And for me, one of the key reasons for using one of these programs is that it gives access for others. And we can think about that in three key ways in terms of team working, which I'm going to touch on more later on. Often we're working in teams when we're undertaking research, but also being able to share our findings concretely. So one of the things that I think qualitative researchers haven't been always very good at historically is illustrating how they got from their piles of qualitative materials to their account or interpretation. And as soon as you start using a software program to facilitate the process, you're able to concretely illustrate how that happened, how that evolved, and therefore validating the interpretations that you generate. And then thirdly is the idea of sharing data, okay, which is a key aspect of access for others, being able to share our work so that we can not only work together, but also build on previous analyses later on. And I'll come back to some of these things later. If you're interested in those ideas of access, then there is a post on my website where I've written that out in a bit more detail. Okay, so I showed you earlier a screenshot of many logos of different programs. What are the differences between all of these programs? Well, here is a list of some of the key differences. Okay, and if you look down at that list, then you're probably thinking, oh, wow, how am I going to understand all of those differences? and work out what's going to be most appropriate to me. And that really, I guess, is where I'm coming from in this webinar today. And I want to do that by thinking about how important it is to be informed when we make appropriate choices. And I'm going to do that by focusing on two key things today. First of all, I'm going to be thinking about some methodological considerations and then also some practical considerations. The methodological considerations that I'll be talking about relate to data, analytic method, computer assistance, and interrogation and visualization. And the practical considerations that I will touch upon are technical practical considerations, team working, the learning curve involved, and the available resources, all of which inform appropriate choices. Okay, so before we continue, I have a disclaimer, which is that in the time available today, it's absolutely not possible to provide a fully systematic or full comparison of all of those different programs. And also, it's worth mentioning that they are developing continually. Okay, so what I say today about a specific package may be completely out of date tomorrow or next week when new updates are released. So therefore, my purpose today is really to raise awareness of some of the key differences at a high kind of broad level, and to get you thinking about some of the key things to consider to make the right choice for your particular situation. So what that means is that the examples and the illustrations that I use have been chosen to illustrate the points rather than me going through all of the differences and saying each program can do this or not that or whatever. That's actually something that Anne Lewins, who unfortunately can't be here today, but my co-author Anne Lewins and I are writing our third edition of our textbook at the moment, when we're going to be looking at that in more detail. So today, really, it's high-level methodological and practical considerations. Okay, so let's get started with methodological considerations and think about data. Okay, so qualitative data can be text, can be audio or video data, image data, still images. And it's useful to think about the types of data that you have. Are you working with data generated by talking with research participants, maybe via focus groups or interviews, through observations? Are you generating data through questionnaires? There's all kinds of different ways that we can generate data. That informs the type of data that we have, but there's also many different formats of data. So that's to do with the file format. If it's text, is it a Word file or a PDF, etc. Different types of image and video audio formats, and also the amounts. But finally, also thinking about integrating those different data together. So I'm just going to touch on a few of these things moving on. Okay, so programs that facilitate the analysis of text only. Okay, so these are some of the key ones. Some of them have been around for a long time. So the ethnograph, for example, was one of the pioneer programs. Others have been developed and become available much more recently. Taget is an example of a much more recent program, but these programs here on this slide are focusing on providing tools that allow us to analyze text. It's worth noting that some programs were originally developed to facilitate the transcription of audio files. Actually, Transana is one of those as well as F4 Analyze and Squintal. So understanding the kind of developmental orientation of programs is really important. But if your data that you're working with is text-based, then these programs are focusing on that form of data. what about if we have other forms of data in our study as well? So here we have programs that facilitate the analysis of multiple data types. So not just text, but also audio, visual, and mixed data. So by mixed data, I mean an example might be a survey where we've asked open as well as closed questions. These programs here on this slide are all handling a variety of different types of data. Not all of them are handling all of the different options, but they do handle more than one type, if that makes sense. Then we also have tools like Interact and Elan that are focusing on visual materials, video data. They allow textual annotations, but the primary form of the data is visual. So hopefully you can see by thinking about data that there are programs that are specifically designed for different data types. So that's a key consideration in terms of the context of our work in given research studies. Okay, some of those programs facilitate the integration of data in additional ways. So some programs, for example, have special import procedures from literature databases, so bibliographic reference management software. Others of them have very advanced means of enabling the integration of data from different forms. Maybe, for example, if a participant has generated visual data as well as being interviewed or taking part in a focus group. So integration is an important aspect, not just thinking about the types of data that the program can import and handle, but also how that can be integrated is something to investigate and to think about informing your decision. Okay, I'm going to move on then and talk about another aspect of methodological consideration. Earlier, I mentioned the spectrum of methods used to analyze qualitative data. And as we all know, quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis are often contrasted quite clearly, quite spectacularly. Some of you may have seen this image doing the rounds on social media in recent months. Actually, I absolutely hate this image. I think it perpetuates false dichotomies and outdated paradigm wars. But also, this image, if you saw it on social media, for me, when I saw it, it was really, you know, the ignoring of mixed methods analysis approaches was really key to me. So I think it's much more useful to think about a spectrum of analytic methods rather than creating these contrasts that perpetuate unhelpful ways of thinking about qualitative and quantitative methods. So I could rant about this for a long time. I'm not going to do that. If you want to hear my rant, you can read it on my website. But the relevance of bringing this up today is to do with thinking about the range of tools that we have available, okay, that allow us to facilitate different forms of analysis on different forms of qualitative data. And for me, informing appropriate choices between programs is important in this context because it's important to understand the kind of developmental impetus of the programs that we use. So some developers have specifically developed their programs to fill gaps that they've identified in already available tools. So that context is particularly important in understanding and navigating the breadth, the plethora of choices that we have available to us. Okay, so let's pick that out a little bit more. Okay, so programs that were designed primarily to facilitate qualitative approaches to qualitative data. By qualitative approaches to qualitative data, I mean methods like grounded theory, thematic analysis, IPA, interpretive phenomenological analysis, etc. but also some forms of discourse analysis may be considered here. The important thing in terms of tools here is that we're on that sort of kind of more human interpretation end of the spectrum, when capturing ideas about what's meaningful in the materials that we're working with is essentially a process that the researcher is in control of, and is using tools like coding, linking, annotating, memoing to capture aspects of meaning in order to access those later to build an interpretation. What does that look like in terms of inside software programs? So here, first of all, is a screenshot from Delve, which is one of the newer programs showing codes, qualitative codes developed by the researcher on the right-hand side there, and they can be used to tag materials, text in this example. Similar is another screenshot from F4 Analyze. And one of the key things about this program, some of you may have been to the webinar that we had before Christmas last year, specifically about F4 Analyze. And this allows us to integrate our annotations, our memos within the actual text, and then incorporate our reflections embedded in the data through the coding process as well. If we're thinking about audio-visual data, here is a screenshot of Elan, which is a tool for annotating visual materials. And also here, Transana, that was originally developed to facilitate the transcription of audio and video materials, but now has a whole host of other functionalities. And Transana allows you not just to work with one video or audio file, but to synchronize multiple ones and have multiple transcripts capturing different perspectives on that multimedia data. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the kind of qualitative approaches to the analysis of qualitative data and some of the tools which are specifically designed for that. If we move our thinking to the other end of the spectrum, then we have programs that are designed to facilitate quantitative approaches to qualitative data. What do I mean by quantitative approaches to qualitative data? Content analysis, text mining, text analysis, some forms of linguistic lexical analysis, discourse analysis maybe. These programs are designed to support methods that want to quantify some aspect of the content or structure within our data, our qualitative data. And that means that we have a range of different sorts of tools available to us, and the aspect of computer assistance starts to come into its own much more when we're on this side of the spectrum. And I'll come back to that later on when I talk about computer assistance more specifically. But what happens in the middle? So we also have a range of programs that have either been specifically developed to facilitate mixed approaches to qualitative data, so enabling both the kind of human interpretive aspects, but also some of the more quantification and computer assistant aspects. So some tools, Deduce, for example, was specifically designed to facilitate mixed methods analysis. Other programs such as Atlas TI, MaxQDA, and Vivo, they are three programs that were originally developed to support qualitative approaches to qualitative data, but over time have added more tools that also now facilitate mixed approaches. So these are some of the programs that kind of transcend those two key ends to that spectrum. Okay, I mentioned earlier that some developers have decided to develop programs to fulfill specific gap in the market, if you like. And it's useful to think about that in terms of specific approaches. So here are some examples of tools which are specifically designed for particular approaches. So Discover Text, for example, again, we had a webinar, I think back in September or October last year, when Stu Schulman, who developed Discover Text, talked about that tool. But inherent in the development of Discover Text was the idea of balancing the value of human interpretation and the power of software. So key to Discover Text, for example, is the idea that the human researcher can actually, not individual, but teams of human researchers will code qualitative materials initially, and then the software learns from those codings and then suggests how other data may be coded as a result. So there's a kind of adjudication process, but a key driver, one of the key drivers of the development of Discover Text was balancing those two ends of that spectrum, if you like. ELAN was specifically designed to analyze language and sign language and gestures, and you can see that in the tools it has available. Others like TLab and Lyric and Wordsmith are coming from the kind of linguistic inquiry disciplinary context, and have tools looking at concordances and different patterns in text, for example. QCA Map was developed specifically in the context of the steps outlined for qualitative content analysis by Philip Mayring. Raven's Eye comes from the quantitative phenomenological context. Stories Matter comes from oral history traditions. WordStat is coming very much from the content analysis and text mining context. Leximancer similarly has automatic topic modeling, and QIP, which stands for Qualitative Impact Assessment Protocol, was developed at Bath University in the UK, and it's actually their tool that facilitates their methodological approach for assessing impact in various evaluations and programs qualitatively. So that's not really available as a program for anybody to download and use independently, as it's very much tied in with their methodological, with the methodology, the QUIP methodology that they developed, but they train and support its use outside of their own work. So the point I'm really making here is understanding the kind of disciplinary and methodological context from which programs are developed is really, really important in informing our choice about what's relevant for our particular needs. But it's not to say that these programs can't be used for other methods, or indeed that other programs couldn't be used for these specific methods. It's just that knowing those developmental bases is important. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about computer assistance here. So kind of moving towards the side of that spectrum where we may be working with large volumes of qualitative data, where we may want to quantify aspects of those materials, the structures, the contents. And then in those kinds of approaches, the assistance that the computer program can give us starts to become more and more relevant. So which programs incorporate analytic assistance? So here are some of the key ones. And some of these programs have assistance at their heart. So I mentioned that earlier when talking about Discover Text. But there are others that have assistance at their heart. Some of them, however, incorporate forms of assistance alongside other functionality. what does that assistance look like? It can be a variety of different things, and each of these programs operationalizes that assistance in slightly or fundamentally different ways. So assistance might be clustering using natural language processing, topic modeling, automatic classification, sentiment analysis, theme detection, and so forth. So what that assistance looks like, as I said, varies quite considerably. But importantly for me is the extent to which the researcher can contribute to that process. And that also varies. So at this point, I want to advertise our webinar next week when the developer of WordStat and QDA Minor, Normand Pelladou, is going to talk about this topic in the context of sentiment analysis. And he's going to discuss the dangers of what he calls the black box approaches that deliberately hide internal parameterization. And he's going to argue for the importance of adapting analysis tools to particular contexts and applications. So what that means in terms of making informed choices with respect to the assistance that may be available, for me, it's important to think about and understand three things in this regard. First of all is what type of assistance is provided. Okay. Secondly is how explicit the basis of that assistance is, and that varies quite considerably. Some programs aren't very open about how that assistance is operationalized, how it's happening. But thirdly, how much contribution we as human researchers have to adjust those parameters of the algorithms that are being used, and also importantly, refine the results to ensure that they're meaningful for our analytic objectives and thereby can contribute to answering our research questions. So analytic assistance in these programs is actually quite a big and complex topic, and how it happens, how it's operationalized is quite different. Okay, I want to move on to what I think is the final methodological consideration that I want to talk about today, which relates to the interrogations and visualizations that these programs enable. The possibilities for interrogating patterns and relationships that have been captured, whether they've been captured through our human interpretive processes or more automatically, vary quite considerably. Okay. Therefore, thinking about the sorts of patterns, relationships, and anomalies that we may need to identify as part of, to satisfy our objectives, our research questions is really important. It's also really important to think about the kind of what I call the directionality of our work. Okay, so we may be working more deductively, we may be wanting to use interrogations and visualizations to test theories and hypotheses, maybe if we're working within a theoretical framework. Equally, we may want to use these interrogations and visualizations to help validate the interpretations that we're generating in a more bottom-up or inductive way. And again, that will affect or be affected by where we sit methodologically on that spectrum. Also, the extent to which comparison is inherent. So do we need to compare subsets in our data or cases in our research design? And also the extent to which we want to or need to represent connections within and between data and concepts. And this whole topic of the different interrogations and visualizations that are available, we could spend a whole day making comparisons of the different options in these programs. What I'm going to do today is just show you a few screenshots just to give you a flavor of the options and the variety. So first of all, interrogation. So top right here from MaxQDA is a code matrix browser, which is the result of looking at particular codes. So the rows in this matrix, this table, are codes capturing where different people have been talked about in the data, and then each column is a separate transcript. So you can see here the quantification is on the level of the number of coded segments for each code in relation to each data file. The case in MaxQDA and most other programs is that behind those numbers is accessible the qualitative data. So going back to that idea of access. Something similar is shown bottom right here, which is a screenshot from QAQDAS, which is showing a comparative interrogation of codes, but displaying the qualitative segments that have been coded alongside the frequency information. And bottom left here is a screenshot from Deduce that's showing some graphs that are also allow us to access the data that sits behind. We also have mapping. This is a key way by which we as human researchers can visualize and interrogate connections within and between data. Here's an example from the software Atlas TI, where we can build our own networks of connections. Something similar here from NVivo, where we can build concept maps and make our own connections between all kinds of different aspects of our data. This one here is incorporating codes, and also data files and memos. And then finally, here is a screenshot from Hyper Research, where we're just looking at a hierarchical visualization, or a visualization of different elements of a hierarchical coding scheme. Mapping is quite different from modeling. So here are 4 different representations of from some of those programs that provide more of that automatic assistance that I mentioned. So from left to right, we have topic modeling from Leximancer. Bottom right in the middle is a visualization from Irametech, which was discussed in last week's seminar by Stephen Gourlay. Top right, we have a model generated showing connections between items from Leipzig Corpus Minor, and then something similar bottom right from WordStat. So these are kind of automatically generated. So there's a difference between mapping, where we make the connections ourselves according to our interpretations, and modeling, where it happens based on the work that's undergone previously. Okay, so those were the key methodological things I wanted to talk about. I'm aware that I've been rambling on for ages already. So let's get on to the practical considerations. And I wanted to talk about technical, team working, learning curve, and resources. So first of all, technical in terms of platform. Okay, some programs are Windows only programs. So here we have examples of programs that are Windows only, although of course, if you're a Mac user, you can probably run these programs using a virtual machine, Parallels, VirtualBox, and so on, or running Apple Boot Camp. Then we also have cross-platform packages, programs. It's worth knowing that there aren't that many of these programs that are Mac-only programs these days. And several of these ones I'm showing here are cross-platform programs, some of them just Mac and Windows, some of them Linux, and others also. And then we have online applications. So several these programs are online applications whereby you log in through your browser. And that really brings us on to this next aspect of practical considerations, which is team working. It's worth noting before I move on to that, though, that some of these programs that we're looking at right now are available only as online applications, whereas others, such as Atlas TI and Leximancer, have both online versions and standalone versions that you install on your computer. So there's a variety in terms of platform compatibility. What about team working, though? So what I'm like to talk about often are distinguishing between the human and the technical aspects of team working. Human aspects of team working relate to how team members are going to split and then combine their work. And that involves thinking about consistency amongst those multiple researchers, but also throughout an analysis. But what I'm really talking about today is the technical aspects of team working. And that has to do with whether multiple researchers can work on the same set of data via the program at the same time. So whether the program is single user or multi-user, basically. So here we have programs that enable the merging of single user projects. So if myself and my colleague have split our work and working separately initially, in these programs we can combine our work within the same program in the single user context. Multi-user or cloud versions, so these are single user programs that also have multi-user or cloud versions as well. So that opens up additional lines of possibility. It's also worth noting that there is an endeavour at the moment called the Rotterdam Exchange Format Initiative, where 6 key CAQDAS developers, these ones here, have been working together to develop an exchange format whereby analysed data can be exchanged between programs. That's implemented in those programs and also a few others already. And hopefully that's going to really change the landscape in terms of facilitating collaboration across different institutions with different site licenses, or just users who prefer one or other program. It's also worth knowing that several qualitative data archives are using that format as a means of helping to archive material. Okay, a couple of other practical considerations. Resources, okay, how much time do we have? How much money do we have? So free CAQDAS packages. These ones are freely available, okay, and most of those are also open source, meaning that if you have programming capabilities, then you can make use of that. So there are now quite a lot of free and open source CAQDAS programs out there for those of us who don't have access to licenses or sufficient funds to buy any of the others. We've also got the issue of the learning curve, and I think this is one of the most frequently asked questions that Sarah and I get at the CAQDAS Networking Project. Which is the easiest to learn? And that's often couched around questions to do with intuitiveness. It's impossible, really, isn't it, to answer that question concretely, because not only does everyone learn differently, but some people find one program really intuitive and then other people find the same program completely unintuitive. So it's very difficult to answer that question. But probably it's true that the programs that have more functionality take longer to learn to harness appropriately for given analytic needs, because basically there's more to understand architecturally about those programs, and functionally because there's more options within the program, and therefore there's more to think about. But those more complex programs tend to be incredibly flexible, more flexible because they've got so many options. So therefore, the learning curve issue, the intuitive issue, is to do as much to do with the amount of time that you have to get to grips with a program, as well as what you actually need out of that program. Okay, so I guess I want to finish off by rounding up those points I've made about methodological and practical considerations. In deciding if you're in the position that you need to make a choice, then, you know, myself and Sarah, nobody else can tell you what's the best program for you to use. You need to think about what your priorities are, okay? What is it that you cannot do without? And what is it that you could compromise on? Because there's probably going to be a compromise along the way somewhere. So thinking about what that compromise is okay to be is really important. Making an appropriate choice is about being informed. So hopefully I've started at that high broad level today to talk about that. We have reviews of quite a few different programs, not all of the ones I've mentioned today, but quite a few on our website. You can see the list there, and we're writing more and more all the time. But talk to your colleagues, seek others' opinions, trial the programs, and use that to inform your decision. Okay, so what's my main message? There's no best CAQDAS package. There's no one best CAQDAS package, just like there's no one best analytic method. It needs to be appropriate. Also, you can use multiple tools, especially now that we have the ability to exchange, which will hopefully increase over time. Others' favorites are not necessarily what you should choose. I see on Twitter all the time, what do you use as being the basis of the decision about what somebody else should use? It should be framed by those practical and methodological considerations, which are different for everybody, aren't they? And also it's worth saying that if your choices are constrained, okay, so if you have a lack of resources, but you do have a site license available for you, then you can usually make that program work for you, maybe by using other non-dedicated tools alongside. So I'm going to finish up now just so that we have some time for questions. But here are a few questions that are useful to ask yourself as you move on and start thinking about this in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much indeed. I am going to take over the slide deck. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of information there, I think we can all agree. Fabulous to have had such a comprehensive overview, rather than just focusing on some of the kind of sort of typically seen packages as well. So really thank you for that. And I had a couple of questions myself, but we've also got a couple coming through here. So Helen is asking here, Christina, are some packages dominant, i.e. more widely used, especially in universities and by companies? And are some very little known or very little used, to your understanding?
Yes, probably. And I think that depends on a range of different things. So I guess programs that have been around longer have had more time to become more dominant. In the UK context, a lot of universities have site licenses for NVivo, and that means there are a lot of academics and students using that software program. But it's also disciplinary, informed by disciplines. So different disciplines are using some or other programs more or less. So, you know, if you think about it across the kind of whole field of analysis of qualitative data and across the whole world, I don't think it's true to say that there's dominant programs. There are some that are more well known, more well used maybe, but you know, I would kind of think, well, not sure that that would be the reason to use a program or not, which I hope is kind of what I've talking about.
Yeah, great. I have another question here from Francisco. So Francisco says, thank you for the presentation, Christina. In terms of access, do you think it makes sense to introduce a criteria based on degrees of openness? So usage of standard file formats, open standards, safeguarding, interoperability, etc. So in terms of access, that degrees of openness become something that we talk about a bit more.
I think that's something that is becoming more talked about now. So I showed a slide earlier about the kind of free and open access programs that are now available. And that movement is definitely taking hold at the moment. We're seeing more free and open access tools available, and I think that's a good thing. In terms of, what I was talking about in terms of access was to do with my access as a researcher, or me and my colleagues' access to my thinking and my data and my process through the use of software. But yes, I think, we are definitely moving to more and more to this kind of general open access realm in all kinds of areas of academia and research generally, and CAQDAS is on that bandwagon, as it were, as well, which I think is good.
I think this question is also touching on some of that, but also touching on the idea of standard file formats. So exporting, being able to kind of move our work from one space to another, so that we harness the power of multiple tools, rather than trying to search for one that does everything for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the drivers behind the REFI exchange standard format that I mentioned earlier. That's one of the key things, yes, because some of the software programs focus on particular tools that facilitate particular methods, and are not going to or don't want to, or there's no point in trying to replicate what others are doing. So this idea of sharing through that format certainly means that, ideally in the future, I'll be able to go from one program to another to do something specific, and then come back to the program that I'm used to carry on. Not quite there yet, but hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And within the mixed methods context, that's particularly important in lots of ways. I had a question myself. So you spoke about learning and learning curves, something that I think you'd agree often comes up for us when people are talking about their own learning and wondering about how to start it, and is the idea of when to start it. So there's the experience of the learning curve, but when should I start learning a package?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think something that we come across lots of times, don't we, Sarah, in our workshops, the number of times that a researcher or a student will say at the end of one of our workshops, oh, I wish I'd known this earlier on in my PhD or my research, and there's different ways of thinking about it. So some people feel that they don't want to learn the software until they're ready to start using it straight away. So sometimes, sometimes people will come back again for a refresher when they're at the point. But for me, thinking about these programs essentially as project management programs, I think you can use them for a whole range of purposes, which, analytic tasks before you're at the stage of that formal analyzing the data. And so opening up our minds in that respect is useful. And, thinking about literature reviewing as an example, in the context of students learning to do qualitative analysis, for example, great way to learn the software and also the technique of analysis when you're reviewing your literature. It's partly a kind of personal decision about when is the appropriate time to learn. But for me, the earlier that you start thinking about these tools, the better, really.
Yeah, much to get on with, even if you haven't got your data yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So we've come to the top of the hour here. I have a question from Sergio about qualitative data repositories. Sergio, we will compile the information about that and include it for you. So I'd like to say thank you so much to Christina for the session today. Thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. Please do join us on one of our upcoming webinars as well. And as I said earlier, get in touch if you would like to contribute yourself to this webinar series. It's been fabulous to have so many people come forward and want to share their understandings, learnings, experiences with us. It's been a really, really fruitful enterprise. as I'm sure Christina will agree. So without much further ado, I hope everybody has a great weekend and keeps well, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so very much. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Sarah.